The name Lisa Gerrard might not be one that's instantly recognisable, but chances are you've heard her music at least once. Gerrard began her career in the 1980s as one half of the Australian avant-garde band Dead Can Dance, before going on to compose music for films such as Whale Rider, The Insider and that remarkable vocal score for Gladiator, for which she won a Golden Globe in 2000. From the unlikely setting of her home in country Victoria, Lisa Gerrard composes scores for some of Hollywood's biggest names, and she's now one of Australia's most highly regarded artists. Ahead of her first ever Australian tour, Lisa Gerrard joins me on Sunday Arts. Lisa Gerrard, thanks for joining us on Sunday Arts.
Thank you.
Two places that play a very big role in your life, Druin and Hollywood. They're not quite sister cities, are they, those two places?
No, not really. But when it comes to making music, it's a kind of cave-like culture where it doesn't really matter where you are because you go within the infrastructure of your mind and your imagination.
So you mean you could make the sort of music that you make anywhere?
Well, I've often thought that, you know, with the different venues that I've played at and things, that once the lights go out, it doesn't matter whether it's La Scala or, you know, the Moe pub, it's really the same thing.
You've once said, I think, that wild horses couldn't get you out of the Australian bush, though, so that part of Gippsland is very important to your work, isn't it?
It's very important for me to be able to connect with that frequency because I find that the work has such a fragile centre, and, you know, because I was born here, that there are certain frequencies that I grew up with in the abstract, and I find those to be a refuge and a starting point. That's very important. It's contemplative.
Can you take that with you, though, when you're composing? Because I know there was an amazing moment where the tyranny of distance was clearly too much for one filmmaker you were working with, Michael Mann, who got you to move over to the States, and he literally cloned your recording studio in the States. And that was component for component, true? So did something of that place come with you to that studio?
No, it wasn't really necessary for him to do that because my work's in my heart. But it was a lovely gesture and it was very impressive.
Let's go back to those early days that I mentioned before when you were a young person and you headed off to London, I think. How old were you when that happened?
I was 19, I think.
And what were your musical circumstances then? What were you doing musically?
Well, I began playing in pubs when I was about 14, which I was punished and forced to join a light operatic society.
Who punished you exactly?
My parents were thought, well, if she's going to insist on doing music, we'll put her into the light operatic society.
Oh, I'm sure it wasn't punishment, Lisa.
It was. It was hell on earth. And I didn't know any of the words, and in fact my personal assistant now, I met then, he was on lights, he was the same age as me, and he was also being punished and he was sent there.
So the light opera was not for you?
Definitely not, no. We did Oklahoma, that killed musicals for me, I think, permanently.
So did you literally do a runner from this sort of life?
Well, I'm never connected with rational practicality when it comes to musicality. I can't see how the two things live together.
But what sort of music were you doing in the pubs?
Playing yang chin and piano accordion and singing.
Did the audiences like it?
No, of course they didn't. I mean, they were just saying, get off, get your clothes off, and shut up, and, you know. I mean, it was awful. But it was wonderful because I believed when I was there that I was going to change the world, and feeling that I had something so precious and so important.
And in the meantime, people are getting their noses bitten off.
I know. But I think when you're young, you're completely oblivious to that.
So how did London call? How did that beckon to you?
Well, it wasn't my idea. It was the person I wrote music with in Dead Can Dance, Brendan Perry, that he said, nobody's interested in our work in Australia, and I couldn't sort of connect with that at all. I sort of felt that we were doing the things that were meant to be done in some way, that something was being changed in the abstract. And he wanted to go to London, and I said, well, okay, I'll come to London. But so we went to London, and we lived in severe poverty for quite a while. But because we had our work, it was our saving grace. It didn't matter.
About that time, you said that because there was no money and therefore not much of a social life, it just turned you both right into the crucible of making music, of making that work.
Exactly, and reading, because we both joined the local library, which had the most extraordinary collection of books, especially in the basement. Mm-hmm. But the sort of books that we were reading were anthropological works and poems of anthropological kinds and looking into different spirituality.
When you were living and working there and life was pretty hard financially, you found though, didn't you, that there was an audience for the kind of music you were doing with Dead Can Dance. What did you perceive about the appreciation of that time? What were people getting in your music, do you think?
I was surprised when I got to London that I actually thought that the music that was happening in Melbourne was more innovative and interesting. Yeah, I was surprised that it wasn't as risky. See, that was the thing, that by having the pubs around Melbourne at that time when I was young, they had stages in them for music. Mm. And even though they may not have been romantic with the lights on, they provided a space for a poet. So I was surprised when I got to London that there was a kind of mob mentality. Mm. Within the art world, which I was surprised by.
You sing in an interesting way in many cases where you use your own language. It's not a recognisable language, it's your vocal vocabulary, if you like. I wonder where that comes from. Does that come first, or is that a thought after the music itself?
It comes directly from a response to the music, an automatic response. And each piece of music has its own language.
Are you trying to avoid understandable speech for a reason? Does that get in the way of what you're trying to do musically?
No, because sometimes English words turn up in my work and I don't censor them, I leave them there.
There's such a melancholic quality to a great deal of your work. Are you aware of a particular emotion that's being tapped into when you compose, when you sing?
Sometimes I feel a mixture of deep love and safety. And even though the work it's always been put with really sad things, when I'm singing it, I don't feel sad, I feel hope.
So then how do you balance that, this sublime state that you describe, with the harsh reality then of dealing with Hollywood, with the people of Hollywood, with the filmmakers, with perhaps even the actors and that entire industry? Do you find it difficult to reconcile those two parts of your working life?
I have a great sense of humour. And
well, that'll get you by.
Yes, you have to have a really good sense of humour when you do this work.
Do you have to also be hard and insistent when you need to be?
I can't ever do that, ever. Because if I do that, without cutting you off, I risk losing the sensitivity that it takes for me to make my work.
Surely as a musician, you must always be pushing against the changes, the corruptions, the compromises to your work.
I don't make soup. I don't make soup.
How do you avoid making soup?
By staying in contact with my arrogant vision.
You have to work then with directors who are going to respect that too.
They work with me because of that. So I only work with artists.
That's why the connection clearly with the director Michael Mann has been such a good and strong one in the movie The Insider, and also Heat, which visually almost works as a piece of music too. Who are the other directors that you've enjoyed working with, Lisa?
Ridley Scott I really liked.
On Gladiator?
He's a real artist. In fact, if he wasn't doing movies, I'm sure he'd be doing masters, like big paintings. When
yes, I can see that.
You can see that, can't you? And I really liked working with Nikki Caro because...
This was on Whale Rider.
Yeah.
Yes.
She just stayed on the couch and with me in the studio, because I work very long hours when I do a film. And she'd sleep and wake up, and then she'd tell me, no, don't do that, yes, do that. Or, you know, she was very... without any connection with any political hierarchy.
I'm thinking of the film Baraka, for which you did the score, and there's astonishingly potent scenes in there. For example, the scavengers on the rubbish heaps trying to eke out a living, and then we see shots of homeless people on the street as well.
Yes.
When you have images that powerful, and laid with that is your voice, which is powerful but operating at a different emotional level, then that's potentially the two working together for almost anyone of any background and speaking any language to get.
I wrote the piece of music that's used in Baraka in that particular area, in that sequence. It was amazing because I remember when Brendan and I were working on that particular piece of music, it was like being in contact with angels, rough angels, raw, and I felt that this is exactly where, if God is going to send His love, He's going to send His love to these places.
You were speaking before about zoning out from the politics, the hits and the cruelty perhaps of that Hollywood world. I know that in your experience you've met some people there who you've found to be quite benign, if not more than that, such as Russell Crowe, the actor, who gets a bit of bad press, but you have a different view of him, don't you?
He's a deeply sensitive, very, very intelligent man who simply probably gets very tired. And I don't think people realise how tired and how tiring the work is, and how exposed that someone like him, especially when he goes to that very, very deep level of the work, how exposed and fragile he must become afterwards.
Lisa, you're about to commence, I think, your first national tour of Australia, is that right?
Yes.
What's taken you so long?
Money. You get that?
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of been because we've always started in Ireland, and by the time, and we've always broke even on the tours and had to be very careful because we don't come through the mainstream of music, you see. Music has a very long shelf life, but it sells very slowly. So we've had to, in order to be able to keep working, we've had to be very careful financially. And coming to Australia was always that unknown quantity that the promoters here were sort of like, but nobody knows who you are, and you know, where did you play last? The Crystal Ballroom or the Rising Sun Hotel in Richmond? You know, what sort of...
I remember those venues, Lisa.
I know. Do you?
Those were the days.
I had a residency at the Rising Sun Hotel in Richmond.
Now, see, that's something to be proud of.
I know. I used to have 3 people used to come and see me every time I played there.
Lisa Gerrard, thanks so much for joining us on Sunday Arts.
Thank you.